Welcome to this week's program. I'm your host, Diana Longrie. Thank you for tuning in. This program is brought to you from the studios out of Valley Access Studios and is a production of Put Your Hands Together Productions Incorporated. Now, today we are going to focus on a number of issues that were discussed at the Maplewood Housing and Economic Development Commission recently this week. These issues are matters that have been before the Commission in the past, and one of them being the annual update on the loan that the City of Maplewood gave to the Larkin Dance Studio. And the second item is talking about the Gladstone neighborhood and a couple of properties there that the City of Maplewood has on their wish list for properties to purchase in an effort to redevelop the community. So let's get started with our first clip. And the reason I have this clip is this is the beginning of the meeting. Keep in mind that the HEDC Commission, Housing Economic Development Commission, used to meet once a month, and that was so they could discuss business initiatives in Maplewood, talk about the business outreach that Maplewood was putting together between the city government and the business owners of Maplewood, to talk about other types of business considerations for properties such as tax increment financing, for instance, and looking at various proposals having to do with businesses either coming into Maplewood or how to expand our business base, all those types of things that this commission could be addressing. And initially, they were a commission only addressing business concerns. Then they were merged with the Housing Commission. So that's how the Betsy Commission became the HEDC Commission and had housing added into it. And they continued to meet once a month. Well, over the last year or so, the City Council and the upper management of Maplewood, they decided that there really wasn't enough work for this commission to do. So they changed their meetings from being monthly to being quarterly. And yet, at the council meeting, we hear of many different initiatives, questions, outreach efforts that they talk about that certainly would be appropriate for the involvement of the HEDC Commission. And yet, they've decided quarterly is sufficient for their meetings, and they don't meet in subcommittees in the meantime. So what is it exactly that they are to accomplish on a quarterly basis? Well, I suspect that moving them from a monthly meeting basis to a quarterly basis has also decreased the commitment of the volunteer committee members to be a part of this committee, since it is being given less priority and that there's less focus on it and that it seems to be less relevant in the scheme of things up at City Hall. As a result, this recent meeting, they didn't have a quorum, which means they couldn't conduct any business, they couldn't take any votes, but they decided to move forward with the information that was going to be presented to them, because at least that way it was an avenue to be able to get that information via cablecast out to the community, so at least community members know what was going to be discussed had there been a quorum. I'm very glad that the commission members that were in attendance decided that that is what they wanted to do, that even though they weren't having an official meeting, that they were going to continue with what the discussion points were anyway and the presentations that were prepared, so the public knows what is in the pipeline, so to speak, when it comes to the Larkin annual report and the Gladstone wish list of City Hall. So with that, let's look at our first clip.
To the Maplewood Housing and Economic Development Commission meeting. We do not have a quorum this evening, so we will not be gaveling in. We will not be conducting any official business this evening. But there are items on the agenda that we would like to at least share information with everyone on. So that's what we're going to do. So nothing really official here.
Nothing really official here. However, thank you for providing the presentations anyway. Thank you for keeping them cable cast so that we as members of the public and the media know what's going on. One of the first topics that they addressed was the annual Larkin report. Now, Larkin Dance Studio is required to give an annual report as part of the conditions of receiving their loan from the City of Maplewood. This is their second annual report. The report was in the packet. They don't go through much of it at the meeting, but let's take a look at our next clip as they get started with the discussion.
First item of business, do we want to address the Larkin in our conversations
Chair
today,
and
Mike?
Commission, yeah, I think we can just walk through the new business items A through E.
Okay.
We'll just have that conversation. As the chair mentioned, there will be no motions or actions taken on the agenda, roll call, minutes, or adjournment.
Right.
We're just discussing the items that were set forth.
And the Larkin Studio was not one that required any action on the committee anyway, or commission, so it's informative for everybody.
That's correct. So I can provide a brief overview of the memo.
Now, the Larkin Dance Studios, originally, they were located in the Plaza 3000 shopping center up near Maplewood Mall. So if you know where White Bear Avenue is and you know where the Maplewood Mall is, well, across the street, across White Bear Avenue, is another shopping center area where the Country Buffet used to be, which the Golden Corral is there now. We now have Hobby Lobby there. And the Larkin Dance Studio used to be in that shopping center. Their rent was going to be increased to a level that they felt that they needed to move. So they were looking around for new rental space to move to. Maplewood City Hall wanted to keep the Larkin Dance Studio in Maplewood. So when that issue came up and there was a building off of Highway 36 right around Hazelwood area and off of Cope there, that was a building that was vacant. Larkin did not own that building, but the owner of that building was offering some of the space for lease to Larkin. However, the space had to be renovated in order to make it compatible for the use of Larkin Dance Studio. So Larkin Dance went before the City Council and asked for a business loan. Now, this is the first such business loan that Maplewood has given to a business in Maplewood. And it's supposed to spur on jobs and employment, good paying, sustainable jobs in Maplewood. Now, it's always been a little unclear that with regard to the improvements that were made, while they were made to accommodate the needs of Larkin, they are actually for the benefit of the landlord or the owner of that building. And so there's always been this question of these improvements for which the loan was for. You know, obviously it helps Larkin Dance Studio, but it certainly helps that landlord and the owner of that building. And those improvements will stay with that building and actually improve the value. And I have joining with me my co-anchor, Mr. Kevin Berglund. And so we're very happy that we have him here to help me with the analysis of these clips. I know that many of our viewers have indicated that they like watching our program because they like to see the analysis and the background details that we give that support the clips that we show. So, Mr. Berglund, thank you for being here.
And good to be here. Thank you. On this, starting right off with this issue of the Maplewood making free with taxpayers' money to their favorite business or their favorite landlord without any sort of criteria, just a shot in the dark. You would think that if Maplewood was to be granting loans to businesses or free money to businesses, there would be some sort of criteria. There would be something in their bigger vision, a bigger vision of what would make Maplewood more prosper.
Right, and that goes exactly to the point that we're going to be getting to about the criteria, because in this particular loan, there were conditions to that loan, but they were rather loosey-goosey in that they had to have a certain number of full-time equivalents in employees that were new and added. But when you break that down, those are all part-time employees that when you add them up, that's how you get full-time employees. It's not that you have people who are working full-time. You have a lot of little part-time jobs that when you add them all up, you get this cumulative. But the definition for a full-time equivalent and how you measure that was not included in the contract. So when you say there should have been criteria, you're right, there should have been what definition of a full-time equivalent should be applied when doing the analysis of whether they have complied or not. And we got a clip that shows you where that issue comes into play this time around. And the other question that you brought up with regard to, what is the objective of these business loans? You're right. There's no real clear-cut objective. It's just, well, we've got this taxpayer money that is that special assessment, 0.5% every year that is assessed the property owners. We get that extra money, and so it is taxpayer dollars. And so they got this pot of cash, and they want to use it. They want to spend it, and they can't just let it sit there and accumulate. So that was the first thing they did without having any type of rules or application rules in the beginning at all.
And it seems like they're using that money to make friends with some business owner they want to make friends with. It's when you say they're accumulating money, is this something they accumulate money for to make friends with somebody? They have this money to spend to give it to subsidize their business, or is this something they're accumulating to buy properties, which they want to? Because it's always been this history of, it seems like for a long time the history of Melinda Coleman is that she wants the city to get in the real estate department, meaning buy properties to turn them over to her favorite developer or right. Somebody whose vision she agrees with.
And certainly there is a history of that in Maplewood. For instance, taking a look at the area off of Larpenteur and 35E. Over by Champs, there are a number of townhome units that are built there at that intersection. There used to be houses there, but those houses had a problem with their basements filling up with water because of the backlog of storm sewage and other issues in that area. Maplewood bought those properties and did the demolition, did the cleanup, did all the grading, and then they got an appraisal of the property and they sold the property for less than its appraised value to a preferred developer to build those houses. And we know that those properties, they were bought with economic housing development money, just like this pot of money that Maplewood has now. And your question about how is this money available to the business community in general to tap into? That's an excellent question, because there is, from what I understand, there is no application process, there's no application form, there is no call for proposals to businesses to apply for funding. There's none of that. All we know is that one day Larkin showed up at a city council meeting to get a loan, for which they didn't know what the criteria really was going to be, which they didn't know what they really had to show. They didn't have to show a profit and loss statement. And even the mayor at the time, Mayor Will Rosbach, asked them if they had a business plan. And they looked at him and said, duh, a what? They didn't even have to provide a business plan. So your question about, does it appear that this could be used as a mechanism of favoritism? That perception, I think, is accurate.
And of course, one has to wonder if they've made it at all clear out in any internally whether it's a profit-making business that they will subsidize with a loan or a free loan or a grant, or if it is a nonprofit. Now, I know there are churches in Maplewood, and many of those churches have big old boiler systems that they hire, I think, like Larkin, a few people. And would they come in and give them a loan to buy a new $100,000 boiler? Because the boiler they had in there is from the 50s. Now, why would there be a difference between, for example, a nonprofit of church, and if the whole criteria is to have 4 or 5 people working there, or a business, right. 4 or 5 people.
Well, and to your point, I know that there are churches that have expanded their mission beyond just having church services, that because of the size of their facilities, they are able to open their doors to other nonprofit organizations that come in and do public good, that provide food shelves, that provide other types of services that are employing people full time. And so your point is correct. Couldn't a church come in and say, we have a proposal, but in order to expand our facilities to allow these other nonprofits to come in and employ people and build upon the facilities we have, we need to have a new boiler. Just like Larkin had to have new floors and mirrors on the wall so they could run their business, we need a new boiler so that we can allow other nonprofits into our facility to be able to do what they do and employ more people. If they could meet the criteria of the number of FTEs that Larkin had to do, well, why couldn't they?
Well, and I'm thinking also of maybe Catholic schools. Take, for example, Maplewood Presentation. They run a school with teachers. They might need a new rooftop air conditioner. Would not Presentation, I think, hires a lot of full-time employees.
Well, and
Presentation
maybe
Catholic Church and School.
Sure, but maybe they need that because in the summertime, because, like, say, as an example, hypothetical, without air conditioning, you can't operate summer programs without an air conditioner. Well, so if you have the air conditioner, you can have the summer programs and you can hire more people. You see what I'm saying? So yes, if you can tie that need for the improvement to employment of individuals in the facility, in the building, and you can meet the criteria, why shouldn't you be eligible? But we don't know that because we have never seen any eligibility requirements. no application, no application process, no calling for requests for proposals, nothing.
And the city manager of Maplewood, Melinda Coleman, we want to make it clear she doesn't seem to be confined at all to make decisions as she wants without giving any clear explanation or directions. We have, I know we've had this last budget for 2017, that she made up the budget, I guess, in the back of her head and with a couple staff members. And the happy sheep of the Maplewood Council, without even seeing the budget detailed in paper, went ahead and passed her budget. So she seems, we don't want to make fun at Melinda Coleman's expense that she does what she feels like it. Just, we
look at the actions.
Yes.
We look at the actions. So we certainly would welcome to see the criteria that is required to apply for a loan. But there isn't one that we know of.
And if she had kind of the disposition that she would give people an explanation of why she makes these arbitrary decisions and try to put some sort of objectivity in criteria, but you have the sense when you, even though she seems to indicate for her strength finders that she's good at making conversation, when you actually ask her, could you make some conversation of how you made this decision, her response is it's not a glib, it's not factual, it's not, here, let me lay it out for you. It's, get away from me.
Pretty much not your business.
Right,
Your business.
yes.
And I'm glad you brought up strength finders. And for our viewers out there, next week, I believe it is, we'll be having our program actually talking about and demonstrating the City Council and the upper management of Maplewood, their strengths, because they recently completed a day-long retreat which focused almost entirely on their strengths through a use of a test called a strength finder, and to determine how they can work better together. Now, we did have our volunteer reporters there filming the event because, quite frankly, in past retreats, they have focused, at least in part during the retreat, on their mission, objectives, goals, ideas for the future of Maplewood. At this particular retreat, it seemed more like an employment conference. And keep in mind, the City Council and the Mayor are not employees of the City of Maplewood, and yet this retreat was like an employment conference, getting together and figuring out how they can work better together as a team. The City Council is part-time. They don't even have offices up at City Hall. They don't even have a desk they can call their own. They have a little table they can jointly sit at if they wish, but they don't have an office or desks there, or even a private phone there.
Now, this whole strength finder, which the City of Maplewood conducted, that would be the top city administrators with the City Council. I never really got a sense. They all took this evaluation of what their strength was, and I wasn't sure if it was to let the administrators know what the strengths of the council members were. That, for example, one of them has the ability to think in detail, think in terms of numbers, or if it was a retreat which allowed the city council members to know if they have put the top administrators in the right position. In other words,
and keep in mind, the City Council doesn't even have anything to do with who is in what position up at City Hall, because it's a Plan B city. See, so the City Council, actually, that's why for them going through what the strengths are of all these upper staff people is rather irrelevant, because the City Council does not run the day-to-day affairs of Maplewood. They don't do that. They're only supposed to report to the city manager, Melinda Coleman. Melinda Coleman, it's important for her to know the strengths of all her staff people, because maybe she doesn't have them in the right positions. Like, for instance, Mr. Mike Funk, the assistant city manager, he's the analytical guy. Well, why don't they have the analytical guy running economic development instead of having Mr. Dwayne Dewey Canicchio, who's the arranger and likes to make sure that everybody feels good about the flowers they got on their desk? He shouldn't be in economic development. He should be in HR, working with Terry, who's been there for years.
Or
You see, and put Mr. Mike Funk over there in economic development because he's the analytical guy.
And maybe that's what the city manager is trying to get her hands on, is why it is such a complete disaster, because they have the person who is running economic development has strength of being a food inspector in terms of knowing how to arrange a kitchen correctly.
Right. I mean, because
maybe that's part of the disaster which is going on in Maplewood. You got the person who knows how to arrange things, trying to actually bring jobs to Maplewood.
right, when you need an analytical person who can look at the pros and cons and do cost-benefit analysis and analyze things. You know, they are underutilizing Mr. Mike Funk. They're totally underutilizing his skills. They got him relegated to human resources. What for? Put him up in the big position. He's the assistant city manager.
I know.
Give him all the jobs that Melinda Coleman can't do.
Well,
that would be 80% of it. No. Then we would have a new city manager. That's right.
I know that what in Maplewood, their kind of key word, or what is the word that they actually go to, is they want to imply they have data-driven government and they're collecting all this data.
Yes.
But if you are actually going to use data to run your government, you don't have to have arrangers. You need to, if you think the public believes that data-driven government is good and that you do things that show that they need to be done because the data shows that this needs to be done, you would have people with high analytical skills throughout the whole city administration. And it's kind of odd when you have this complete big cake, this big bureaucracy administration, and there's only one guy who has strengths of analytical skills. Is there something upside down here? I mean, of course, in Maplewood case, when you look at it you look at what they do, you look at their actions, you see that really they don't run anything in Maplewood through their data. The city manager emotes, or they all have their political feelings and their political desires, and they can collect as much data as they want. They don't really care about data because we're in charge. We're going to do what we want to do, and we're going to do it arbitrarily because it's as if this is our house and we do what we want with our house. Stay out of our house because our house is the city of and we're not, at least in the case of the city manager, Melinda, we're not even going to give you an explanation of why we're doing with our house what we want to do with our house, the house being the government.
Yeah, exactly. So let's continue on with the analysis of the Larkin annual report for this year.
December 9th, 2013, the Maplewood Area Economic Development Authority, which the City Council serves as, approved a $70,000 forgivable commercial reinvestment loan to the Larkin Dance Studio. This was to assist their move. They were at the Plaza 3000 and they moved to a site at 1400 East Highway 36, which was a vacant building at that time.
And as I indicated, that's the past history of this. So let's continue.
As discussed in the body of the report, terms of the loan required certain fees to be paid as part of paying back a portion of that loan. Also a certain amount of dollars spent in improving the building that would also forgive a portion of that loan. And then the last part, which we'll discuss tonight, $25,000 to forgive of the loan if certain job and wage goals had been met. Those wage goals included 4 new FTE jobs in the building by the end of December of 2016 and maintaining at least 10 full-time jobs in the commercial building until December 2018.
Now, Mr. Berglund, you had indicated early on in the program about the giving away of taxpayer dollars for free to businesses under this loan. As we heard there, with this loan, a portion of it is forgivable, $25,000 from what he indicated. And that is if they meet these various conditions over the long term. And as we will see, they've changed the way they analyze those conditions midway through the process. I don't think that that is a legitimate way to do business. So let's continue on with the next clip and see what else they have to add.
With the report that was given to you in your packet, Larkin had indicated through their attorney that they had met the 10 FTE job requirement, but were at 3.5 FTE for new jobs. But further in that conversation between the time your packet was sent out and tonight, Larkin did their report to incorporate the IRS's definition of a full-time employee, and that report was handed out to you prior to this meeting. And we'll put that we'll make an amendment to the packet that's posted online so that report can be seen as well to the general public. But then using the IRS's definition of a full-time equivalent employee, they are indicating that 4.5 new jobs have been created and that those were in place by the end of 16, so they are meeting those job goals.
I wish that my job as an attorney was as easy as that attorney had for his job, because he knew what the criteria was. He ran it through the numbers using the previous criteria for the FTEs that was applied the last time they gave a report, based upon the understanding of the city and Larkin what an FTE was.
Wow.
But they came up short. But like any good attorney, let's find a different way to measure FTE. So he found a different way to measure an FTE. Oh, let's go to the IRS. They must have a very credible definition. Let's use theirs. If we use theirs, now we comply. Boy, as I said, I wish my job as an attorney arguing my client's position were so easy. Why didn't somebody at the city, for instance, if Mr. Mike Funk was a head of economic development, being that he's the analytical thinker up there according his skill-based skill finders test, why don't they have him? Because he could have looked at this and said, analytically, we shouldn't be changing our definitions in the middle of the reporting periods. That doesn't make any sense. Mr. Dwayne Dewey Kanikio probably looked at it and said, wow, we got different definitions? Well, if their attorney says it's okay, it must be okay. What about our attorney? What about the city's attorney? What about somebody arguing on behalf of the taxpayer? Mr. Berglund, are you flabbergasted by this example?
Flabbergasted, and your antennas have to go up when Maplewood does this, because it's not as if the attorney who represents the money, people who got free money, says it's okay because they got a new definition. You would think that Maplewood Appeal, that their attorney looked at it and said, yeah, that's right. Or Mike Funk looked at it and said, yeah, I went through the numbers, I went through the raw data, and that's right. Now, of course,
it's not appropriate to use a different definition of FTE just because it makes it look like you comply. You got to use the same definition you used last year, because otherwise you're inconsistent.
Well, that's Maplewood flip-flop, changing definitions, and of course, if they flip-flopped on definition of what the criteria in FTE, they might have had all these sub-definitions under there, which they might have flip-flopped around on. But the question that I would ask this staff member there, okay, if the attorney said, well, you really don't have 3.5, but you have 4.5 new jobs, those other 10 full-time jobs, what did that turn into? Did that turn into 15? I mean, why not use the definition? Shouldn't you use the definition universally, whatever definition you find and whatever process you come up with? Shouldn't your report have the same, at least all through the report?
Yes. And keep in mind, definitions are somewhat dependent upon what the purpose that they're used for. Now, I have not had a chance to look into the IRS definition of an FTE, but I would guess, if I had to make an educated guess, that the IRS is got a definition about FTE because that is to give guidance to employers with regard to if they have to consider somebody full-time in order to pay benefits, to withhold certain monies, to comply with other requirements that an employer has to be aware of. What is the IRS defining FTE for? For
Right.
what purpose? Now, for what purpose was Maplewood using FTE for? Last time around, it was based on 40-hour work week. So if you had two people that both worked 20-hour work week, that would be one FTE. So even though you had two people, but they were both working 20 hours, that would have been one FTE because that equals one 40-hour a week person. Well, that's again where those definitions come into play. You can't just arbitrarily pick whatever definition you want and say, well, that must be okay, because it may be for a different purpose and quantify something differently than what was the original intent of the parties. And of course, Maplewood's original attorney in drafting this document didn't actually put in the document the actual calculation that the parties agreed to use. So all we can go on is based upon what Larkin and the City of Maplewood analyzed and agreed to after that first annual reporting period. And that would be their practice under their agreement. Now it sounds like the practice has changed, and I don't think that that's fair to the taxpayer.
Shim Sham around is the name of the game that I think they feel very proud of themselves up at City Hall. And I think they feel very proud and grand that the Maplewood City Council has very little interest in any of this. And they're happy to just be happy sheep following along,
Well,
not even running through the trail themselves.
Well, they certainly are confident that very few questions are going to come from the Head Sea Commission members, because keep in mind they're volunteers. They haven't met for a quarter of time, and they don't even have a quorum. So, what pushback are they going to get from the Head Sea Commission? Little or none, because they've almost nearly been disbanded.
Well, I know that, for example, in one case, Councilmember Kathy Juniman, if this was her own private money, she would be barking up a tree, attacking something if it wasn't done the way, or it wasn't accurately calculated. For example, if she went over to Panera's and had a sandwich, and they charged her an extra 50 cents, I can only see, and she's paying that out of her own money and not out of the city money, I could only imagine the holy hell she would raise. Or if she is getting her garbage picked up and she wants the cheapest garbage once every other week, and they charge her for garbage pickup every week, you can only imagine how she would be set on fire. But of course, when it's not her money, everything is wonderful.
Well,
it's the hypocrisy, I think, in the end. The hypocrisy and the unaccountability, which does not give this Maplewood Council shining stars, and people who look at it. It so aptly fit that where they had the retreat was called the Crooked. The name of this business, this restaurant, this bar was called the Crooked Pint. It seems only appropriate that Crooked Maplewood has their retreat at the Crooked Pint.
I had not thought of that. Let's continue with our next clip.
So what the requirements of the agreement stated was that Larkin just had to provide this report. There were no definitions agreed upon of what a FTE means. So using the IRS definition is probably a good place to start. So with that, staff is providing this information as an update to the commission on the status of the Larkin loan. They do have to provide these annual updates through the end. So they'll do 2 more, one next year and then one in 19. And then they would be done as long as they can continue to maintain those goals.
So here we are halfway through the agreement. Oh, gee, this definition of an FTE, well, it's a good place to start, even though we used some other criteria last year's report. Let's look at the last clip of this discussion point.
Really important that we take good care of our building stock, and so just want to do a shout out and a thanks to Larkin Studio for their hard work, and excited to see the trend line in this report that they are growing.
And that, of course, is one of the commissioners and his comments with regard to this. And again, it's certainly no fault of the commissioner not to be asking questions. I mean, how could he? I mean, it's been a whole quarter since the last time they met. There's no definition for an FTE, so it's no surprise that he has no questions when staff and the attorney for Larkin concludes that everything's been met, all the conditions are in place, and we're just going to move along, and that they've got all these new jobs. Well, goes to show you, if you only meet quarterly, how can you be an effective commission member, because you're just catching up to speed and then you're gone for 3 months and then they just give you another report that you get to rubber stamp.
And again, we don't want to make fun of it, but if one of Maplewood's top priorities is to have engagement, citizens engagement, these commissions are actually the highest level where citizens can engage, because they can take a look and give a feeling, give a sense, give an approval in some cases if the city is going the right direction, and they have suppressed these commissions. Now we know that they've eliminated public comment. They don't want to hear from the general public. The best that I can understand what they mean by citizens engagement, I guess once a year on April 1st, they want to bring in 5-year-olds and have a joke-a-thon where they have 5-year-olds tell riddles to the police department.
As part of Kid City.
Right. They wanted to have the 5-year, 6-year-olds tell jokes, or more appropriately, riddles to the police department as a whole, to the top administrators in the city council. And that's what I think Nora, Slawik, and the city council mean when they say we want to have our public engaged. And boy, do they pat their back that those are some of the funniest jokes they've ever come across.
Well, and the other aspect of communication that they have pointed to that is going to be the new avenue of communication and engagement with the residents of Maplewood is Facebook. And the other night, I was watching the Planning Commission, and the technician guy who's supposed to be running the camera and the sound for these meetings when they're cable cast, somehow or other the microphones either weren't turned on or they weren't working, but I could not hear the comments of the commission members or the questions that they were asking, because they were raising some very good questions about the proposed developments for Wakefield Park that we have talked about on these programs 2 weeks ago. And I think I'm going to go on Facebook, and I might put a link to their cable cast and say, what happened to the sound? Why can't I hear my commissioners? I would like an answer, please. And post that on Facebook and see if I have any kind of better communication or better engagement than if I simply could go to my Maplewood City Council meeting during public comment and to let them know that the sound is bad. So do you think that they'll let my Facebook stand on, my comments stand on Facebook? Because they're not positive, right? I'm asking, what about the sound? How come the sound wasn't working, right? So let's continue on now with our next topic, which we're going to be looking at film footage, again from the Headsea, where they're talking about Maplewood's, the city council, and the top administrators' wish list for what they want to buy in the neighborhood of Gladstone in Maplewood.
Dealing with potential city acquisitions of 1160 Frost Avenue and 1375 Frost Avenue. Show the first map, that's of 1375 Frost Avenue. And I will remind the commission at your January meeting, we talked a little bit larger picture about the general outlook and intention of the city in the Gladstone neighborhood, and that part of what the city's looking to do is to become more active in figuring out what the next goals and steps are within the Gladstone neighborhood.
They're thinking that they want to become more active in the goals of the Gladstone neighborhood. Well, okay, they haven't really asked the neighbors, I don't think, what the goals for the Gladstone neighborhood are. And certainly the Gladstone master plan, that was the citizens plan that was adopted back in 2006 and 2007, has basically been relegated to a distant corner of a storage building somewhere on City Hall campus. The reason I say that is because now this next new proposal for the bowling alley property, you know, they got phase one, they had to make adjustments so that building could be higher than what was required under the master plan that was approved. Well, guess what? Phase two is going to be 4 stories, higher than what the master plan envisioned. And so they're going to have to get a conditional use permit for that. And there again, the input and what are the goals for Gladstone? Who set the goals for Gladstone? I'd like to know. And now the city says they're going to be more involved in setting the goals for Gladstone. Well, that means who at the city is setting the goals for Gladstone?
I don't think we're going to be able to find out, because it's the same shim-sham that Maplewood goes through every time. Essentially, I think it all boils down to the city manager, Melinda Coleman. She has a feeling she wants to moat something unexplained in her psychology demands this kind of response. She does it because she does what she arbitrarily wants to do, without any explanation. And then if you really...
Yeah, and unfortunately in a Plan B city, right, she can do that unless the council takes her supervision into their hands, because that is ultimately who her supervisor is the council, not the mayor. It was so funny at that retreat. I'm convinced that the lady running the retreat didn't know that Maplewood was a Plan B city. So she always talked about the mayor giving directions to the city manager. And I'm thinking, she's not supposed to be personally giving directions to the city manager. It's supposed to be directions that the council as a whole has directed the city manager that this is the policy, this is the goals, whatever, and then the city manager has to effectuate that. But it isn't the mayor going and saying, you need to do this today, you need to do that today, you need to do this tomorrow. And yet the person who was running the retreat, I don't think she realized that Maplewood was a Plan B city. She may have operated her retreat and her exercises differently if she would have realized that the city council actually doesn't run the day-to-day affairs of City Hall.
And of course, one has to believe that the retreat facilitator actually had engaged in conversation with the city manager. And so one wonders if the city manager's strength is to communicate with people.
Well, that's
to
her strength finder said she was a communicator.
engage them into conversation in terms of giving them all the details, why the city manager wouldn't tell this facilitator her number one ace in the hole, trump card, that the city manager in the city of Maplewood gets to make all the decisions anyway.
That's right, exactly.
So I don't know if that was just a big performance that they went on, but it certainly seemed as if the city manager of Maplewood did not communicate accurately with the facilitator how Maplewood is run and Maplewood works. And she was more like going on how maybe the old town of Mayberry was run in the Andy Griffith show.
Or St. Paul, or St. Paul, which is a charter city with a strong mayor. And so with St. Paul, that's the way it operates.
Right.
But that's not the way that Maplewood has been organized, and is not the way.
And we're talking
it's
back in the
supposed to be.
beginning, when the organization still holds from when Maplewood was formed.
Well, yeah, no, they've never changed their form of organization. They've been the same way for 60 years.
And you know, as they talk about how everything needs to be flexible in a more transparent and age, which they say they can run the world through cell phones and computers, why do they not think this old type of authoritarian leadership, where one person's gut feeling, not based upon any data, but just being a political operative and gets to make decisions on how $55 million are spent? Doesn't it seem that annually, doesn't it seem like if you're going to look at one of the big problems, one of the big challenges of Maplewood, it's how how the person at the top actually conducts business.
I agree. Let's take a look then at our next clip as they continue to talk about the properties in Gladstone.
We have a successful project going on at the redevelopment of the Bowles site with the Frost English Village, but we want to see how we can kind of start to piece together that next project. In the capital improvement plan, the City Council has tagged $4.7 million to start to be used for acquisition of property for redevelopment in this neighborhood. So if the council continues with that plan that's been stated in the CIP, then that would start to take place next year in 2018.
$4.7 million has been earmarked in the CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan. Does that mean that they have that money? No. Does it mean they have a money tree behind City Hall that they're going to harvest and get that money? No.
Well, maybe they have investors that want to put $4.7 million in.
Then it wouldn't be in the Capital Improvement Plan. This is money they don't have, that they will have to go to the bond market to obtain.
Oh, they're not going to ask their residents, do you want us to put, or you want to raise your property taxes $4.7 million so that we can...
Well, they could do that too. They could do that too, but that would be a hefty increase. They might lose their elections doing that.
So they have another strategy,
so
behind the curtain strategy.
That's right, because you see, it's always easier to go get the bonds because then you're only paying the interest, so you don't have to raise property taxes quite so much because you're only paying the interest over time. So, and of course some of the principal is, it's just that, I'll put it on my charge card today so I can spend today, and then I'll just keep paying it off for the next 15 years at twice the price. So there you go. They've got it set aside in their capital improvement plan, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to spend that money that they don't have. But let's continue on with our next clip and see what else fits into the puzzle here.
But in the interim, we've encountered two properties that are available now, and we think that strategically they're properties that make sense, that it would be in the city's benefit to try to acquire those at this time. The first one we'll talk about, it goes reverse order. I should have looked at the report when I put this slide together. About 1160 Frost. This is just east of the Maplewood Marine site, just west of the Gladstone Savannah, south of Fleacheck, and it's indicated on this map by the red box. This is a property that went tax forfeit. Only in cities outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul, we cannot purchase properties for economic development at a lesser rate. It has to be market value, just as any other bidder would get. So we did not try to acquire this piece when it went tax forfeit. The party that did started to use it for junk storage of vehicles, which the code does not allow. So as the report indicated, they were issued a tag to correct that, which they did. But then they kind of came to the conclusion they didn't really have a use for the property. So we felt instead of them looking for an interim use that probably might not be something the neighborhood would be happy with, the city would try to acquire this directly.
What I find fascinating, Mr. Berglund, about that dialogue, first of all, that piece of property was indeed tax forfeit property. And when it came up as tax forfeit and Ramsey County was putting it up for sale, you see, Maplewood, because it's in their borders, they get first crack at buying it. And so they did have the first crack at buying this property at the price that the county of Ramsey wanted to sell it at, which I believe, if I remember correctly, was $60,000. But this came up before the council when Will Rosbach was mayor. And I remember distinctly that the council at that time said, oh, this would be so nice if we could buy this land. Oh, we want to buy this land. It would be great to buy this land, but we don't have the money to buy this land. And so they didn't buy the money, and they passed over being the first in line to buy it, knowing that if they bought it, it would be for redevelopment. They even said so. So now, of course, somebody has bought it. Maplewood is putting pressure on this person to use it in some way that the person isn't sure how to use it, I guess. And so Maplewood is now going to offer to buy it now from the middleman. It's going to cost even more. And why not just have the guy put it on for sale to developers and they can build houses there? Why does Maplewood have to buy it?
Well, this gentleman here, the city administrator, makes it sound as if Maplewood is trying to acquire property to add to its asset of properties, as if they are going to keep this in their property portfolio to have a park on it or to put housing on it, which they will rent out. But of course, as what they're requiring it for is to do a real estate deal, to acquire it, to be a flipper, to flip it to somebody else.
Right, so they're buying it at an elevated price to be a flipper, to flip the property over to a developer.
Right.
Why are they doing
Which they
that?
most likely will sell at a less price than they bought it for.
That's right. That's my concern, that they will sell it for a price less than what they purchased it for and that the reclamation was for, just like over there at Larpenteur and 35E.
The one who, of course, who for all practical purposes makes this decision, sets the direction, makes the go ahead is your city manager, Melinda Coleman, who was failed at that other time. She tried to act as the real estate flipper.
You know what? That's right. Melinda Coleman was the real estate flipper in that Larpenteur 35E property deal also. She doesn't have a good track record for this type of endeavor. I don't think we should get into that endeavor now. Well, we've come to the end of our program, Mr. Berglund. Thank you for being here. And viewers, thank you for tuning in to this episode of our program. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye-bye.